Dragon Table, I will go over a tutorial on Atlantis Rising. It's a cooperative resource management game where you're working together with the other players to try and build a magic portal that will save Atlantis from sinking into the sea. Unfortunately, Atlantis does tend to sink into the sea quite a bit, but it's a fun game. Let's take a look. This is Atlantis Rising, set up for a 3-player game. I have my card in front of me here, and then I have my 2 friends over here. There are a total of 6 different characters that you could be. I've got the explorer, the champion, and the artificer out, but there's also an astrologer, a scholar, and a priest. You can choose these randomly by just handing them out, by mixing them up and handing them out, or you can choose them individually. I just did random for this game. So these guys are going to go back in the box. And this is the island of Atlantis, and it's made up of a whole bunch of different pieces that can come apart and be flipped over to show that they're flooded, which is going to happen pretty much right away. The goal of the game is to build all 10 components of the cosmic gate before the island sinks. And if you can do that, then you win the game. And as long as even just this one piece in the middle is left upright, you're fine. Once you lose the middle piece, it's over. These cards off on the left are the blueprint for the cosmic gate. They always include the power core. It has a white symbol on the back. That's always included in it. The other cards that you include in the blueprint will depend on the difficulty of the game you're playing. If you're playing the initial beginner version of the game, you should play with 3 cards from deck A, 3 cards from deck B, and 3 cards from deck C. Once you start stepping up, you can go to A and then C and D, or you can go B, C, D. Obviously the ones in deck D are harder because they have more components to them. They're just more difficult to build. You may need to refer to some of these other cards during the game, so don't put these back in the box. You want to keep these out. It's possible that you might be able to use the ability of one of these components during the game. Because each component has an ability that you get to use once you've built it. The only one that doesn't is this self-healing material. Has no benefit. But all the rest of them have something that you can do when you build a component. And once you've built a component, you take it and you place it in front of you to show that it's been completed. The materials that you need to build each component are listed on the left-hand side of each card. And they're going to be either crystals, which are the white cubes, gold, which is the yellow cubes, or Atlantium, which is the gray cubes. And Atlantium can only be gotten from ore, be transmuted from ore into Atlantium using this part of the island. At the beginning of the game, everyone starts with 3 Atlanteans on their card and with the possibility of being able to get more. They also start with 1 mystic energy unless you're playing a more difficult version of the game, in which case you don't. I do. The champion also starts with 1 courage token at the beginning of every turn, and I'll explain those in a moment. And each of these characters has a different ability. For the explorer, all target numbers to collect resources are reduced by 1. So all of these areas where you have to roll in order to get resources are reduced by 1 for the explorer. So he's good for going out to get resources. The champion gets, his ability is that he gets an extra courage token at the beginning of each turn, and that will help in defending Atlantis, because it's not bad enough that the island is sinking, it's also being chased by the Athenians, which is noted by this board over here. This is the Athenian board. And we're playing a 3-player game, so we're going to be starting the boat here. If you're playing with 4 or more players, you start the boat here. There's also a maximum of how many Atlanteans can be attacking. For a 3-player game, the maximum is +8. And you roll this die, which the lowest number is a 2 on this die. The highest number is, I believe, a 5. So from the very beginning, you could be getting attacked by a lot of Athenians. What a courage token lets you do is add an extra Atlantean to the defense of Atlantis during the Athenians' attack phase. The other thing it can do is if you put it underneath one of these Atlanteans, and then this tile gets flipped before he gets a chance to take his action, the courage token will let him complete his action before you have to take him back. Otherwise, you have to take him back and the tile would get flipped and he wouldn't get to complete his action because it would be flooded. It doesn't keep the tile from being flooded, but it does let your guy finish his activity. The Artificer's special ability is that when she builds one of the components, she can use one less material, which is really beneficial, especially for those big ones. Or she can build a component and use its ability twice. So whatever it's, like for instance, if you build the power core, you get 3 mystic energy, which is these guys, 3 mystic energy. If she wanted to, if she had enough resources to build it on its own, she could take its special ability twice. And the rules say that the person who most recently went swimming gets to go first. And since I took a bath recently and these people are imaginary, we're just going to pretend that I get to go first. So I would get the first player token. But we're working together, so it's not like you're fighting for spots on the board like you would be in, say, Stone Age or one of those other games where you're trying to get resources. You're working together. You can't trade resources once you've gotten them. So if somebody just hoards up a bunch of gold or a bunch of crystals, it doesn't do any good. Everyone has to have some of all of the resources in order to build the components. Unless you have someone in particular that you're saying is dedicated to doing a certain activity, like defending the island while the other people are building the components. And you can do that too. And that's not a bad idea since the champion is one of our guys. If he gets an extra courage token every turn, he's definitely going to want to be placing some of his Atlanteans in the middle in order to defend the island. So let's talk about what you can actually do on the island. On this arm of the island, you can get more Atlanteans. There's a spot for one guy right here. If you put one guy here, then you will get to have another guy when you bring him back off the board. You can place 2 guys here to get an additional guy, and up here you have to place 3 guys in order to get 1 additional guy. So you have to put more, it's more difficult the closer you get to the center. And obviously when the island starts to sink, the easiest pieces, the very tips of the island, start to sink first. Those are the ones that give you the highest reward for putting your guys out. This is the only arm of the island where you do have to put guys of all the same color in order to get the benefit. In these other sections of the island, you only have to put, you can put a mixture. You can have 2 different color guys, and then they both go for, in this case, would be going for crystals. Here you get to draw cards from the knowledge deck. These will give you advantages during the game. Here you get to roll for crystals, and it starts out rolling, if you roll a 4 you get a crystal, ends up rolling a 6 you get a crystal. So it's harder the closer you get to the center. This is for gold. This is for ore, which cannot be used to build any of the components, but you need ore in order to transmute it into Atlantium, which happens in a second turn. Or it could be on the same turn. It depends on the order in which you pick up your guys. Obviously down here, 1 ore gets transferred into 3 Atlantium, so that's the best ratio. Up here, 1 ore for 1 Atlantium, sad face. But by the end of the game, this is probably all you're going to be left with. If you choose to put guys in the center, you get a mystic energy for each guy you put in the center, and this guys in the center will be used to defend Atlantis against the attacking Athenians during that phase. Mystic energy lets you do different things. It lets you add 1 to a resource roll. You can, for as many mystic energy as you add, so that will let you get your rolls in case you miss one. It can also let you, if you have 2 mystic energy, you can transmute 1 resource into another type of resource. 3 mystic energies from any number of people. So I'm playing with 3 people. Each person could donate basically a mystic energy in order to cancel a flood misfortune, and that's what comes from these misfortune tiles. Is that these cause the island to flood, and if one's going to be particularly bad, you can turn in 3 mystic energy to prevent the flood from happening. You can spend 5 total from everyone to unflip a tile that's already been flooded. But it does have to be a tile that's closest to the center. So for instance, if these 2 tiles were flipped, if these 2 tiles were already flooded, you could not unflip this tile. You would have to unflip this tile first. That's the way it works. So in the first phase, you place your Atlanteans, and it goes round robin, starting with the initial player. Putting out their Atlanteans, and you can discuss, obviously because you're working together, you can say, okay, I think I'm going to go try to build this thing, so I need to go get some gold, and you maybe want to do this, and you want to defend the island, and then you can figure out what you're going to do from there. So you place your Atlanteans, then you draw your misfortunes. And what may happen is you may have a tile get flooded where you have an Atlantean. If that happens and there's not a courage token and there's not a mystic barrier on that tile, then you have to take your Atlantean back, the tile gets flipped, and you don't get the benefit of whatever you would put your Atlantean on that turn. And you draw a misfortune for each person in play. Then, assuming everyone is safe, you take your productive actions, and that's where, again, starting with the start player, or you can do it all at the same time to speed up the game if you want, is you pull your guys in and you start rolling for resources, or drawing cards, or transmuting, or into Atheneum, or getting new guys. Once the productive actions are done, the Athenians will attack, and the start player rolls the black die to see how many are attacking. At the very beginning, I don't know how well you can see this track, the first 2 don't add any. It isn't until you get to the 3rd space, which will be the 3rd turn, because the boat progresses each turn. Once you get to the 3rd turn, you'll be adding +1 to the die, then +2, +3, +5, and finally +8. Then what you do is combine the number that's rolled on the die, let's say we rolled a 3, combined with however many Athenians and courage tokens have been placed, or Atlanteans and courage tokens have been placed in the center. And if you have more, then you win and nothing happens that's terrible to the island. However, if there are more Athenians attacking than there are Atlanteans in the center, then you have to flip over that many number of tiles. Let's say we did the worst thing possible and rolled a 5, and let's say there were only 3 Atlanteans defending. That means 2 tiles would have to be flipped, and that would be our choice. We would choose which tiles to be flipped. You always have to start from the outer edge of the island and work in, but you would get to choose. And then the boat moves to the next space. The very last phase of the turn is when you get a chance to build components. And this is when you want to make sure you're talking with the other people to make sure that you don't have 2 people going for the same components. You know, if you get the same exact resources to build these components, it's a conflict of interest. And the last thing you want is at the end of the game to have somebody with a bunch of resources that they didn't even get to use because you didn't plan well as to who was going to be going for which which of the particular components from the blueprint. And there's some other things that are going to come up during the game from either the knowledge cards or the misfortune cards that will let you do different things. Like I mentioned, mystic barriers. You will occasionally have a chance to place a mystic barrier out. What that does is if that tile becomes flooded, then the mystic barrier goes away instead of the tile being flooded. But probably a good strategy for these three particular particular characters would be for the explorer to go out and try to get some of the goods for one of the components or a couple of the components, to pick maybe the easier ones. The champion can be in charge of defense of the island, since he's going to have a courage token every turn, which is nice because the courage tokens go away once you've used them. And the artificer, because they can spend one less resource when building a component out of the blueprint, they would be good for going after the more difficult components in the blueprint. The ones that require more, like for instance, the power core that requires 2 crystals, 2 gold, and 2 Atlantium is a lot. And she would be able to spend 1 less and be able to build the same thing. These are the extra Atlanteans that you can pick up. These gray ones are special. Sometimes you get a knowledge card that lets you use more, that lets you use gray Atlanteans. I believe that there's a component that lets you use a gray Atlantean. That's just a benefit for you for your turn. You can go onto this arm of the island in order to get more of the Atlanteans of your color for a grand total of 6 Atlanteans of your color that you can then place out on the board as needed. When you're going for resources, let's say I was going for resources with this guy. Well, let's say I was going for 2 different resources with that guy. This first one, if I get the chance to pull him back, I would roll a die and I would need a 4, which I didn't get. Oops. I also don't have enough mystic energy to make up for it, so I wouldn't get a crystal from this guy and he would just go back to his board. Now I still have another guy out. I would need a 5 for this one because he's on a different piece of the island. And he gets a 5. So he would get 1 crystal that he could then save and use towards building a component later in the game once he's got more things that he can put together. But basically it's a rush because the very first thing you do is place Atlanteans, so you put your guys out. The second thing that you do is draw misfortunes, and each person is going to draw 1 misfortune. So for 3 people, that means likely you're going to be flooding probably 3 tiles at the very beginning of the game. And sometimes you get to choose, sometimes it will tell you which ones you have to flood. So it's very much a race right from the beginning. The whole time you definitely feel like we're definitely dying. We're definitely sinking into the ocean. And not only that, but these stupid Athenians keep coming to attack us like big jerks. Like we're not having enough trouble with our island sinking. The Athenians have to come and beat up on us too. And meanwhile, you're also trying to build the components in the blueprint. But it's a nice, well-designed game. It's simple. It plays 2 to 6 players. The amount of time it takes to play depends on how familiar everyone is with the game and how many people are playing. If there's 6 people playing that aren't as familiar with the game, it'll probably take 90 minutes. If you have 2 or 3 people playing that get the idea pretty quickly, then you're talking about a 30 or 45 minute game. So it's really not that bad. And it's fun. You feel like you're accomplishing something once you start getting the resources to build components from the blueprint, and you really do feel like you're working together. If you don't work together, you don't stand a chance in Atlantis. It's just not going to happen. The best thing you can do is say, okay, this is my guy's strengths. What's your guy's strengths? All right, let's formulate a plan and go from there. Meanwhile, trying to beat off Athenians with our sticks. But that's it. That's Atlantis Rising. Fun, fast-paced kind of game, but it does involve some strategy. I hope you have fun playing. Thanks for visiting the Dragon Table. I'll see you next time.